Farmers, of course, are subject to a tremendous amount of vulnerabilities, none of which is more concerning, perhaps, than the weather and extreme weather, stormy weather. One bad storm can wipe out a month's worth of work. Farmers are fearful of weather. I once lived in a farmhouse in Manitoba. There was nothing in front of me. I would look out my front room window and I could see for miles and miles and miles, acres and acres and acres. And I felt very vulnerable to the ravages of whatever severe weather would come along. One person who really loves this kind of weather, though, is Braydon Morisseau, one of the preeminent storm chasers in the entire country and the United States as well. Braydon, who's based out of Cochrane, chases storms all across the Canadian prairies and across the plain states of the U.S. Of course, the U.S. season starts first. When that wraps up, the Canadian season gets underway, so it all works out perfectly from a timing perspective. Braydon, hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Braydon, let's get into, first of all, the agricultural aspect of this. You have seen, no doubt, many farm fields, many farmsteads, many farm homes torn up by severe weather, whether it's hail, whether it's tornadoes, or just a strong derecho or straight line wind out of a thunderstorm. Tell me what you've seen. Give me an example.
Absolutely. Well, as soon as you started talking about agriculture, I immediately think the Great White Combine. So definitely hail is being one of those, the biggest risks is that large hail and those strong winds to impact the agricultural side. Is I've seen a lot of those fields completely picked bare from hailstorms moving through the Canadian prairies.
And it's not something, of course, that we can control, but with people like you out in the field, we can certainly get better warnings, better advanced warnings out of it. So many severe storm reports and so many warnings that come out of Environment Canada or the National Weather Service originate with folks like you, who are the eyes in the field, who are the people on the ground witnessing this stuff. When you see a storm happening, how do you react? What is your response? I mean, the adrenaline must be supercharged at this point. What is your priority? How do you handle it?
Absolutely. And that's the thing about storm chasing. I feel like it gets a bad rap that it's all adrenaline based, but it's really important. And one of the biggest reasons we're out there is because Environment Canada or the National Weather Service can only see so far above the surface using their radar. So by being there, we can provide that ground truth. So we do live updates from different social media platforms. And we post a picture, a timestamp, location, and we use different hashtags. So for different prairie provinces here in Canada, we go hashtag AB storm, SK storm, or MB storm for the prairie provinces. And Environment Canada monitors those hashtags to help get those warnings out to the public. So that's kind of our main focus while we're out there, is to get those warnings out there and help get the public to safety.
So that's number one. But I suppose if you come across a situation where a storm has devastated a property and you're wondering, hey, are there people involved here? Your number one priority has to be search.
Absolutely. It immediately shifts gears, and we carry a crash bag in the vehicle. A couple other people that we know, they've got Shannon Bolesky. She's got an AED on board with her. Sean Schofer's got a pair of Jaws of Life with him in his vehicle. So just trying to be prepared for any kind of situation that these storms can throw at you.
And can you give me an example of one you've been in?
Absolutely. We've been in a couple instances where we've come across areas that have been damaged by, whether that be hailstorms, flooding, or tornadoes. Unfortunately, they do sometimes impact homes. We don't see it as much here in Canada because of how sparsely populated we are compared to the States, but it does happen up here as well. So it's important to be prepared for that.
Now, you just brought up Canada versus the U.S. Let's talk about that for just a second. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. season starts earlier, but it's much more vigorous, if you will. There are more tornadoes in a shorter period of time than we get up here in Canada. There are more chasers out there too. And Absolutely. This might have something to do with what you mentioned about the bad rap. Chasers clogging farm roads, chasers clogging grid roads, trying to get that picture, trying to look for the storm. And, you know, there are storm chasers out there, I'm sure, that are out there for the fun, are out there for the photos, and don't take it quite seriously as you do. So how does the situation in Canada versus the U.S. compare in that respect?
For sure. For storm intensity, it does affect things as well. For being down in the States, the area that we call Tornado Alley, it's just so much closer to the Gulf of Mexico, which is where we get a lot of the moisture from the atmosphere to feed these storms. Because these storms, you got to think of them as like a living, breathing organism. they breathe in warm, moist air, and then they breathe it out. And that's what allows them to sustain for such a long period of time and sometimes produce tornadoes and this large hail. Down in the States, being close to the Gulf of Mexico, that moisture stream gets right into those plains provinces and helps fuels those storms. They get a lot bigger storms because of that. But they also have a whole bunch of storm chasers, and it's to a point where it's almost one of the biggest dangers. Is we call it chaser convergence, and chasers can clog the roads, and you can get these big traffic jams around these storms. If there's a tornado coming through, you don't want to be stuck in one of those traffic jams. But up here in Canada, it's really nice because we've got this great community of storm chasers, and again, the population side of things, it's still few and far between. There's still sometimes you can be in central Saskatchewan and be the only person on a storm, and that's really cool. I think that's really special about it.
We're going to get to that in a second, chasing alone versus chasing with a team. But I think another important point to make is the ease with which you can chase a storm in the U.S. Like say Kansas, it's grid roads all over the place, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas in Alberta, you've got terrain, you've got forests. Saskatchewan, you've got forests as well. Talk to me a little bit about some of the differences between chasing here versus chasing there.
For sure. The terrain aspect, definitely, we've got a lot of big national parks the further north you get to. So you have these big areas with zero roads at all. So that can be frustrating. Sometimes you're on a beautiful storm and then you can't follow it anymore because you've come to a dead end, or the road isn't as advertised, or you're up in the sticks. There's a Shane Turgan, he calls it Stixie Alley, and it's up by Lodgepole there. And same Kyle Britton, they kind of came up with a name. It's kind of our version of Dixie Alley for down in the southeastern states. But yeah, definitely a big aspect is that terrain, and you get the rolling hills into the foothills, and you end up on some lease roads. It's a very different beast chasing in Canada.
Now, if you're in agricultural territory on the prairies, what area, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, what area in that 3-province region is the most susceptible to tornadoes, or can one be identified? Because they really do happen anywhere.
They really do happen anywhere, and a great example of that is Didsbury last year, or the Black Friday 1987 tornado is just a stark reminder that we can get those Oklahoma-style tornadoes up here in Canada. But typically, I'd have to say southern Manitoba into Saskatchewan would be more prone to it, just because they're closer to that, where we see that feed of Gulf moisture coming up from these systems. Whereas in Alberta, we don't quite see that moisture get up here as frequently. We really rely on what we call evapotranspiration, which is actually the crop. So we need that heat to build in, and then that crop to sweat because of that heat, and that really aids in our moisture content for these storms.
Now, you were in Didsbury. Tell me about that day.
Yeah, Didsbury. It was a pretty crazy day. We chased the day before up around Rocky Mountain House, Alder Flats kind of area, and we ended up finishing that chase out by Red Deer. And we decided, well, let's just stay the night in Red Deer. It's only a couple hours drive home, but we're going to stay the night in Red Deer. So we were well rested, and we woke up really close to where we kind of were targeting that day. And we weren't originally targeting that Didsbury area. We were targeting the surface low itself just to the east out by Stettler. As an area where you would see convergence or converging boundaries. So a bunch of boundaries coming together to create an area where we thought storms were going to develop. And that area still looked good, but earlier in the day, we could see these storms already starting to build out by Limestone Mountain or Sundre area, a terrain feature that really helps aid storms along the Alberta foothills. And the environment started to destabilize, and it looked really good out there. And a couple of friends of mine from Cochrane sent me pictures of the storm tower from the south. And you can see it had this big overshooting top on it. So that's when it's hitting the troposphere, and you can see this big billowing cloud. So from those photos, we decided we really need to get on this storm. It looks like this storm could be riding this boundary, or a quasi-stationary boundary strung by the low pressure center that had moved into the central area of the province. So we approached the storm from the QE2. And as we came over, we crested the edge of this little hill. We could see the initial funnel starting to touch down. So we phoned Environment Canada to let them know that there was a developing tornado. And then from there, we chased the storm for, it was about 30 minutes, was on the ground. And we got 800 meters from it at the closest point during its life cycle.
And you're known for that. You're known for getting close.
I really like to experience it and see the different characteristics around the tornado. I think it's really cool. Are
you safe when you do that?
Oh, of course, absolutely. There's so many that I feel like so many people are afraid of severe weather, and I really hope that people take the time to get educated on severe weather, because I feel like so many people are afraid of what they don't understand, and if they knew the visual cues, they would know that it's not as scary as it's made out to be. So
now, if you go onto social media or yeah, let's just say social media, and you see a photograph of a storm with a green Jeep posed in front of it, that's Braydon's. Tell me about the Jeep.
yeah, the Jeep. So I've just built it a new one. So it's a 2021 Jeep Wrangler JL, and the whole body is coated in Line-X truck bedding. So it allows us to get into bigger hail, some small debris, and it helps protect us there. It does have 2 dents in the hood now, one being from the 2022 hailstorm up by Red Deer that broke the record for Canada's largest hailstone, set in 1973.
Yes.
Originally. And then the other one was from this May down in the States. We were in Texas. We were in West Texas. And that storm was dropping hailstones that it was the first time that the National Weather Service issued a severe thunderstorm warning with the text DVD-sized hail. So it's 5 inches in diameter.
Yikes. And you got one.
Yeah. So we took some Crown Royal that night and we poured it into the hail dent and we did some shots.
Does your car insurance company know what you do?
They do, actually. She comments on my Facebook page once in a while.
All right, let's talk about chasing alone versus chasing in a team. Now, you are a member of a team.
For sure.
But you also go out alone from time to time. What are the advantages and disadvantages of each?
I think just the focus aspect, by being alone, you can really hone in on your senses, and your situational awareness in the vehicle isn't distracted by anything. I think that's really special about being solo. That helps definitely, but there's a lot of advantages to having somebody with you, because then you have somebody that can look at maps and this and that, right? Being from Canada and having been across the prairies quite a bit, a lot of the roads I know, they're familiar, right? So I kind of have that advantage in that sense when I'm solo up here. That helps a lot by knowing your terrain, right? So yeah.
All right. Let me ask you a question that a lot of interviews start with, but I've held this one back. How did you get started in this? What's your interest? Why are you doing this?
For sure. When I was young, I really loved weather. I could show you a picture. I got a picture of my grade 3 yearbook, and I spelled it completely wrong, but it said, "Where do you want to travel?" And I put Tornado Ale. And I meant to say Tornado Alley. And then when I wanted to be, when I was older, I wanted to be a storm chaser. And so that's it started really at a really early age. And when I graduated, my parents bought me a tour down to the States with my friend's dad, who was also interested in weather. So we went down, and there's a big tornado tourism down in the States. So went down and we chased storms and didn't see anything for the 10 days we were down there, really. But the following year, they messaged me and asked if I wanted to come and help them guide a tour, because they were short guides and they saw that I was passionate about it. And that started a relationship with them. And I chased with them for 3 years. And that really honed in my senses and learned how to chase down in the States. Then I would come up to Canada and start chasing in Canada. So yeah.
How's this year gone for you?
It's been really good so far. I've seen 15 tornadoes so far this year, including the US and Canada. And it looks like next week is going to get really active on the Canadian prairies. Now,
years ago, you used to, or for a couple of times, you hung out with me on school trips, and
Yes.
we talked to fifth graders. And I can remember doing my part of the presentation, and the kids were attentive; they were interested. And then you came along and started talking about tornadoes, and they went from attentive to, wow. But one thing that we stressed in those school talks is safety.
Absolutely.
So let's get back to the guy in the farmhouse. Let's get back to my house in Manitoba years ago, where I looked and I saw for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles and felt vulnerable to the weather. I see something coming my way, which I did. I didn't see a tornado, but I saw a pretty bad storm coming my way. What do you do? I mean, everybody says, go to the bathroom and put a mattress over your head, which is not necessarily always the best advice, right?
Absolutely. And it really depends on your situation. If you don't have a basement, that's definitely an option if it's a tornado situation, but it's just putting as many walls as you can between you and the storm. Staying away from the windows. If you're in a vehicle, trying to seek shelter in a permanent shelter or a sturdy building is definitely a lot safer.
Have you ever been in a situation where you had to do something in an emergency to keep yourself safe? In other words, have you gotten a little bit too close to a storm and had to go into a ditch or something like that?
Sure. I haven't been in particularly that kind of situation, but when everybody asks what's the dangerous situation you've ever been in, was actually with the tour company. We were chasing a tornado down on the Texas-Oklahoma border, and we had a large tornado on the ground just to our south. But it wasn't the tornado that was the danger, was the hailstones. So on the north side of the storm, we get what we call forward flank downdraft winds. So we were getting 100-mile-per-hour forward flank downdraft winds, and embedded in that was softball-sized hailstones. And we were in these big vans, right? And some locals in front of us had froze up, and they didn't know what to do, and they stopped in the middle of the road. And a whole bunch of storm chasers got stuck behind them, and we had to get around them. And at that point, the forward flank had overtaken us, and we were getting these softballs with 100-mile-per-hour winds. And in these big vans wasn't a great thing. So we had to get all the guests to duck down, and it took out every window in the vehicle, to the point where we actually had the hailstones come through one side of the car and blow out the other side of the car. So we had these hailstones gapping through the van. So we actually had Shannon Blesky from Canada here. She's also a storm chaser. She was on the tour back then. That was back in 2015. So that's a very crazy moment. But we were safe when we weren't safe. There's definitely aspects of it. We got everybody to put the luggage on their heads and protect themselves. Right. And it's just the glass, especially, right? So.
And even after that, you decided to continue storm chasing.
We did. We chased for another 2 hours after that with no windows. So we're like, we're just gonna stay out of the rain.
That sounds crazy.
Yeah.
Again, returning to the agricultural theme, I drive by farmyards and I see, a house, a barn, a silo, granaries, equipment out in the yard, that sort of thing. And to me, as a weather guy, I look at that and I see shrapnel, right? Is there anything that you can think of, or is there anything you have in your mind in order to make your farmyard as tornado safe or as storm safe as possible?
For sure. I think having an outbuilding with your farm equipment definitely would be great to keep that kind of separate from the homestead, just to put some distance between you. I know Didsbury is a perfect example. There was a New Holland combine that was actually tossed from the property. They think up to 50 meters, and the weight of a New Holland combine, I don't know, I think it's 10,000 pounds
or more.
Just
probably
or more, absolutely. But definitely that hay bales, even with Tilston tornado in July 27th, 2015 in Southwest Manitoba. In our video, you can see soaking wet hay bales get lofted completely vertical. It's definitely, I'd say that's a big risk too, is the hay bales. So storing them away from the homestead as well.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to the vulnerability, right? It's you're just right out in the open like that, and again, once that storm is coming along, there's nothing you can do except keep yourself safe, right? You keep your person safe. I guess I'll wrap up on a different kind of angle here. You guys are also known for picking places to eat.
Yes.
During chases, before chases, after chases. Any favorites on the Canadian prairies?
On the Canadian prairies,
and out-of-the-way places?
Unfortunately, some of my favorite places have shut down.
No.
Yeah. So way back when I was a kid, Hannah, Alberta, had the best burger on that little right side, that little road stop. It's still, the building's still there, but they're not open. They haven't been open for years now. And then Maple Creek Junction, the gas station there, they also had a great burger at one point. Maple Creek itself does have some great burgers, but my top two would have to be Amarillo, Texas, Coyote Bluff, and then Abilene, Texas, the Betty Rose, their barbecue pit. They've got a brisket infused burger. It's really good. And then Big Spring, Texas, the best chicken wings I've ever had in my life.
Really?
Yeah,
fantastic.
Absolutely. And all homemade flavors. They were great. I'll drive 3 hours out of the way to go to these places. So,
have you ever been to Twister's Cafe in Winkler, Manitoba?
Yes, also a good spot. Yeah, they got some really good soups. Yeah, the only thing is the tornado. So Tornadoes is Tornadoes Cafe, right? I think, is it? Or am I getting mixed? I can't remember. I'm thinking of Portage. Portage La Prairie. They got Tornadoes Cafe. Excellent. But they don't have the E in the end of the name.
And have you got your tickets for the new movie?
Oh, I haven't gotten them yet. See, that's the hard. It's the hard balance. We were going to do an event for the new movie, but with it coming out July 19th, that's our peak storm season. So it's the movie or real tornadoes.
That's just it. And I was wondering even about today too, because certainly not in line for tornadoes today, but thunderstorms are quite possible. So I'm hoping I'm not
for the city
taking you away from that sort of thing.
No, absolutely. Really. I got the radar open right here.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.